Hello, my name is Brian Doyle. I live here in Belgium. I've been living in Belgium for almost 40 years. I came here to study, and I continued to study, and I studied some more, and then I studied some more, and then I became a professor here in the University of Leuven, and that was my career for 30 years, for a little bit more. And I taught Hebrew Bible, and I taught Hebrew, and I also taught different ways of interpreting the Hebrew Bible from modern perspectives, contemporary perspectives, like from a feminist perspective or from an LGBTQ perspective. That's what fascinated me about reading biblical texts. I also studied the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and other parts of the Hebrew Bible, specifically the Torah, from another perspective. And that's because I'm also a rabbi. I'm a rabbi of a small community, which is an Anglophone community. English is the language we use when we are together, but we're a very international community. I think at least 30, 40 different nationalities participate in our community. And the community itself is what we call a liberal Jewish community. The liberal Jewish community says, okay, there must be then other forms of Jewish life, other expressions of Jewish life. And perhaps for us in Belgium, the most familiar manifestation, if you like, of Jewish life is what we see in Antwerp, the city of Antwerp, which has a large Jewish quarter and thousands of Jews who have a very visible profile. And when you see them on the street, cycling back and forth to their work or to the synagogue or to school, you can see very outwardly that they dress in a particular way that identifies them as Jews of a particular movement, not a homogeneous movement, but a particular type of living, a way of living Jewish life, a very strict way of living Jewish life that takes a strict observance of Jewish law as its point of departure. Hence, when you see a man in Antwerp, he regularly, or most of the time, you'll see he has little curls down the side of his head that comes from an interpretation of the Jewish law in the Torah that says you shall not cut the hair on the temples of you shall not cut it. That is taken literally. So from childhood, little boys are not allowed to cut their hair, and it continues. So when it's to avoid it getting messy, they turn it into little curls so that it hangs neatly, and it's trimmed from time to time, but they don't shave it off. You can see that I don't have those kind of curls, because in my interpretation of that law, I understand that law, in fact, to be a very ancient law that referred to a practice that was going on at the time. Maybe we're talking 3,000 years ago, where the people surrounding Israel had their own religions and their own priests and their own temples. And some of those priests were known to shave only the hair on the side of their head. So they had longish hair, but they shaved the hair on the side of their heads. The hair on the temple and down to here. So to me, this is an ancient rule, an ancient law that referred to something specific 3,000 years ago and no longer has any relevance today. But I respect my Orthodox brothers and sisters, especially the brothers who let their hair grow long and they have these little curls. In Antwerp, you have 20,000, roughly 20,000 Jews living there. In Brussels, it's more or less the same, a little less. In Brussels, we have a community of Orthodox Jews, quite a strong community, centered around 4 or 5 substantial synagogues, the main synagogue being the synagogue, the Grand Synagogue, or the Great Synagogue in the center of Brussels. That's an Orthodox, a regular Orthodox synagogue. The men and women who go to that synagogue sit separately. The women sit in a gallery above the synagogue itself, but the men sit together in the main part of the synagogue, but they dress quite normally. So they don't wear special hats, or they tend not to have curls, as you would see in an ultra-Orthodox community in Antwerp. I belong to a liberal understanding of Judaism, and in our community, men and women have the same rights and the same obligations. So we are egalitarian in that sense. Women can be rabbis. Women can participate fully in our liturgy. In Orthodox communities, only men are allowed to participate fully in the liturgy. Women can observe, but only men can actually participate. And that's based on a law that says that men are actually obliged to pray 3 times a day, evening, morning, and afternoon, whereas women are not obliged by this rule. So some women come to the synagogue, but it's only to observe or for social reasons. But men go because there's an obligation. But I'm trying to, if I point out the difference, we have someone like myself. I could be leading a synagogue service dressed like this. I'm not wearing any black or any special hat. I cover my head with a kippah when I'm in the synagogue, and men and women participate fully in my synagogue services and read from the Torah and will sometimes offer a sermon, but especially will participate fully in synagogue life. So we're different, but we're all Jewish. We see ourselves as part of what in Hebrew we call the Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is the Jewish people, that we share peoplehood with people, Jewish people of different perspectives. Often you hear the phrase, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Can you imagine if you have millions of Jews across the world, what variety of opinions you're going to generate? And that has actually happened in the course of history. We have 3 major movements in Judaism. And on the basis of my description of the Belgian reality, you have an Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox movement, and you have a liberal movement, like the part that I belong to. And in America, and it's kind of an American invention, but it's come back to live with us in Europe, and it's beginning to gain momentum in Europe today, is what we call the Masorti movement. In America, they call themselves conservative Jews. And they were a reaction to the liberalization of Judaism that was introduced by the Reform movement. They said, you've thrown away too many of the traditions, and we want to take our traditions back, but we want to remain open. Unlike the Orthodox communities, we remain open to the world and to science and to developments in the world and to participation in professional and social life in the countries that we live in. So you have 3 main movements: Orthodox, Conservative Masorti, and Liberal Reform. In Belgium, we have 2 liberal reform communities. One is Francophone, the other Anglophone. I'm leading the Anglophone community. The French-speaking community is at least 3 times bigger than our community, and we share the same building, the same synagogue with the French-speaking community, and at the same time. So we have services together. We can hear each other in the distance, but we have services together, and we get on very well together. So that's the situation in Belgium. In America, I think maybe I need to give a little brief sketch of the history of how this separation took place. How did we end up with 3 different movements? There are more than 3, but these are the 3 main ones that I'm presenting. In the 19th century, middle of the 19th century in Europe, Jews were living in small communities together. They had a kind of separate status within a country, within a nation, where where their existence, in fact, was tolerated by the local authorities, and they were given permission to be there, permission to live their own lives and follow their own rules, but they were not allowed to participate in the social and economic and intellectual life of the people surrounding them. So at a certain point in around 1850, 1860, at a time when there was a growth in the importance of the nation state, at that time Jews in various parts of Europe began to say, well, we wish to participate in that movement. We want to be part of this nation state. We want to call ourselves Germans and call ourselves French and call ourselves British, call ourselves Dutch. And then you get, at that stage, the evolution, when people started to refer to themselves as Dutch Jews, Belgian Jews, French Jews, German Jews, Polish Jews, Hungarian Jews. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth for many years, describes that as adjectival Jews. Before this movement, they were just Jews. But after this movement took force and took form, there were adjectival Jews. And then he also goes on to point out that these adjectival Jews began to not only see differences with other Jewish communities or within the Jewish community, not only differences in the way they wanted to integrate within the nation, country in which they lived, but also how they wanted to express their Jewishness in that country. Again, in Germany, and then later spreading into other parts of Europe, other major centers of Jewish life in Europe, a reform movement took place where changes began to be introduced into the ritual aspects of living Jewish life. Some very extreme changes, for example, the use of Hebrew as a language for prayer is very standard in Jewish life. It's still standard today. It's exclusively so in the Orthodox communities. In the Reform communities, a great deal of the liturgy is in the vernacular. So in my community, we have some of the liturgy is in English. I'd say 70% of it is in Hebrew still. In Antwerp, in an Orthodox synagogue, it would be 100% Hebrew. But in Germany, they said, no, we need to speak German. We need to have our prayer books in German, and we need to show our neighbors that we are good Germans, and we participate in social life, and we want to teach at the universities, and we want to take up the professions, become doctors and lawyers, all of them professions they had not been allowed to participate in the past. And that grew. That movement grew. It was set in motion by what is referred to as the Haskalah, a kind of enlightenment movement. It was resisted, of course, by Orthodox communities, which at that moment in time began to talk about themselves as Orthodox communities in order to differentiate themselves from the Reform communities. The Orthodox were the ones who did it right, who followed an Orthodox way of living a Jewish life. It spread, it grew. Synagogues all over Europe were built according to the models that emerged from this Reform movement. What was that model? That was one that said your synagogue should look a little bit like the church next door. Some of the content, obviously, of that building will be different, but often the layout was almost identical to the Protestant churches and Catholic churches surrounding them, and that was deliberate. And very often even these synagogues were built and created by non-Jewish architects, and they had a minimum of specific Jewish content in the buildings, but for the rest they looked like churches. Mostly in terms of Christian symbols that you often find associated with churches were not present, but they were replaced by Hebrew texts and symbols from Judaism, which became very common in those days, or were used in the synagogues in those days. And then we have the Second World War, when Judaism in Europe was almost completely obliterated. Many people managed to escape, and when those people after the war started to return, they no longer felt welcome in the nation states in which they had once belonged. So they were no longer really interested in referring to themselves as adjectival Jews, as German Reformed or German liberal Jews. They wanted to be just Jews, and they said we need to be just Jews within our own communities, and they kind of closed the doors. So what survived after the war was Orthodox Judaism, in a moderate form, but very much not wanting to be in the limelight. What had happened, though, is prior to the war, and not because of the war, but prior to the war, because of pogroms that were taking place in Eastern Europe and in Russia, many Jews fled the European continent and moved to America. And they took these liberal Jewish values with them. And that it grew to such an extent in America that the Reform Jewish movement, as a specific Jewish movement has larger numbers of adherents than Orthodox Judaism in America. So there are fewer Orthodox Jews than there are Reform Jews. But you have to put that in a new perspective, a different perspective, something that affects Judaism as a whole. It affects Judaism here in Belgium, affects Judaism and how Jews live throughout the world. That's the fact that the vast majority of Jews are not religious at all. They're secular. They live their Jewish lives as from a very cultural perspective. They do things that they've inherited through their families. Perhaps sometimes they will celebrate Shabbat dinners together, traditional candle lighting sometimes on Shabbat, lighting special candles on certain festivals like Hanukkah. Sometimes they even go to synagogue on Yom Kippur because they feel this is a moment when they can unburden themselves from the sins of the year. But most Jews are very secular. They're not religious. So when you talk about the movements in the United States where the Reform is much bigger than the Orthodox, you have to add that much bigger than that is the group of secular Jews who have no religious affiliation whatsoever. Coming back to Belgium, that's also very much a similar situation. I can speak only in particular for the liberal Jewish perspective on Jewish life, and I want to talk about two or three. Sometimes three sometimes it's important to say there are two main pillars, but I often feel that there's a third one waiting to be implemented. Let's start with the first two. The first of these is, and this is something we share, liberal Jews share with all of the Jewish movements, with the conservative Masorti and also with the Orthodox and even with the ultra-Orthodox. We base our lives on the Torah. It's fundamental to the way we live our lives. Ultimately, we're saying when we say that, we say it as religious Jews. We're saying it as Jews who believe that the Torah has some kind of fundamental significance in the way we should live our lives, and that these are somehow the texts of the Torah, while they evolved in a human context, that they have some kind of divine inspiration that we should continue to maintain. So what do? We study the Torah. We study it in different ways. We approach it in different ways. An ultra-Orthodox boy will study the Torah in a very different way from someone who's working with me to prepare for his bar mitzvah and is studying a particular part of the Torah that will be read on his bar mitzvah day. But we It's a fundamental connection that we have, all of these communities. It's made manifest by the fact that every single Jewish community, wherever they are in the world, whatever their level of observance, their strictness, we are all reading every Shabbat morning. We read exactly the same Torah portion, exactly the same segment of the Torah as whether we're in Hong Kong or New York or Brussels, we're reading the same text. That's fundamental for all of Judaism. For us, very often we ask the question, and we are asked the question, why do you read this ancient text? It's thousands of years old. It can't have any meaning for you anymore, surely. It doesn't have any kind of connection to the modern world. And we agree that every year we come back and we read it once a year, the whole 5 books from beginning to end, and we come back to the same text once a year. We keep coming back to the same text. It's kind of difficult for a rabbi then to say, how can I interpret this text and give a different sermon based on exactly the same text? But in reality, it's not that hard. The reality is, if you recognize the text itself has not changed, but we have changed. And sometimes we change dramatically. Sometimes our world changes dramatically. No one can doubt that our world is a different world from what it was before October 7th last year. On October 7th last year, I was in my car driving to the synagogue to celebrate a festival called Simchat Torah. We're talking about the Torah. This is the festival of the Torah. And on that festival of the Torah, we dance, literally, we dance in circles with the Torah scrolls held in our arms, and we lift them up and we sing joyous songs. And even in my community, we have a little bar at the side of the synagogue where people can have a little glass of something while they're dancing with the synagogue, with the Torah scrolls, to increase the joy of the moment. And I was driving into the synagogue listening to the World Service on the BBC. And I was hearing that something was going on in the south of Israel. And I got into the synagogue and people were talking about it, but no one had really any idea what had happened. We danced. We had a joyful experience, a beautiful, joyful experience. Driving home in the car, the world changed. The world changed completely. It changed completely for Jews, but I think it changed for everybody at that point. Perspectives started to evolve, and the way we continued to read our Torah started to change because we were reading it as different people. Our world had evolved and our world had moved along. It changed the way we read the Torah in respect to what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. I'm going to add a different, 2 different elements about something that I feel is very important from within the Jewish world, from in the liberal Jewish world, and that's 2 principles that are maintained within all of Judaism, but have acquired particular focus within liberal Judaism. The first of these is called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam has a very ancient history, if you like. It has been treated very profoundly by the Kabbalists, very spiritual understanding of how we approach the world. But Tikkun Olam literally means repair the world. And it's understood to be, in the first instance, about repairing the world around us, the physical planet, the world that we live in. Where damage has been done, we should find ways to repair. So it has become, within liberal Judaism, a very ecological perspective informed by this Jewish principle, how we should look at our planet, how we should maintain our planet, how we should respect our planet, and how we should repair it where we see that it's been damaged. This has led within liberal Judaism to be that liberal Judaism is often a very socially motivated religious life. Some people would say their liberal Judaism is in fact only social activism, that they don't have a particularly religious understanding of what it is to be Jewish, but they believe that this fundamental principle is enough to motivate their social activeness, that that's what motivates their lives, and it comes from a Jewish principle that they recognize as Jewish. Very, very important principle. A second principle is that we must protect life. Pikuach nefesh means that you protect a soul. Nefesh is the word that's used for soul, but basically it means a human life. Not just a human life, it means all life, also animal life. And even if you're living in a very strict Jewish environment where you're for example, not allowed to work or to drive or to travel on Shabbat, if someone is in need, if someone is in danger, if someone's life is in danger, all of these laws are set aside, and the focus and the priority is given to preserving life in whatever form it takes. A third pillar that we can now, I think it's important to add, is another principle called Bal Tashkit. Bal Tashkit is a phrase that comes from the book of Deuteronomy, in which, in part of a description, and the description is about when Israel goes to war, and I think this is perhaps very appropriate. When Israel goes to war, it should not destroy. Bal Tashkit means do not destroy. Now you can take it out of the war context, you can take it out of the hostile context and say, destroying is the same as being wasteful. So don't waste anything. And then for many Jews that's become a very important principle, that you don't waste anything, that you simply don't waste food, for example, or that you don't waste other resources like water and other materials that are important for our existence. So don't waste things, don't throw things away. Recycle has become the whole kind of circular economy. For some has been inspired by this idea, don't destroy. If you have a vacuum cleaner that's not working, have it repaired and give it to someone else who needs one. These are the three principles, I think, that are at the basis, let's say, of the way liberal Jews try to live their lives. Having said that, I'm aware that I haven't said prayer, that I haven't said spirituality. As a rabbi, I lead services regularly in my synagogue, and we have a good attendance at these services. And we read more or less a traditional service that's very similar to the Orthodox services, with the exception that I said we don't tend to repeat things. The Orthodox communities will repeat things many times throughout the same service, which makes their services very long. But we have fewer, if no repetitions in some of our services in the vernacular, in English, in our case in English. And we are saying prayers, and we are praying to God. We're asking God to bless us and to protect our world. But I think while we're doing this, we're doing it with an awareness that Judaism in the first instance is about doing, and not really in the first instance about believing. Believing always comes second in Judaism. Again, this comes from a text, a very foundational text, when the people of Israel and Moses received the law on Mount Sinai. The people's response to the reception of this law was, first, we will do what this law says we should do, and then we will listen. We will do first, and then we will listen. The rabbis have interpreted this over the years as meaning that Judaism is a do religion. It's about doing Jewish things. It's about observing the law, about keeping the mitzvot, observing the mitzvot. And then afterwards we worry about, whether it's appropriate to believe in God and whether it's appropriate to believe in life after death and all of the spiritual questions. And many people don't actually get to that part. They just say these are questions that are too metaphysical, if you like, or too esoteric, and I know that I can't find an answer. The big God questions remain questions. But nevertheless, to be a Jew, I can still perform and live my life as a Jewish person. And our liberal perspective on that is living a Jewish life, not so much simply ticking the boxes of the mitzvot and saying, okay, I've done that, or I've not done this, and I've done that, and I've not done this. There are negative and positive laws in the mitzvot, but that my life has been informed by important principles, that I live a just life, that I take justice not just for myself and for those around me and for my family as vital and as important, as fundamental, but also for how I stand in the world and how I engage with other people and how I engage with the planet around me and how I engage with other communities within my community or within my world. When I see other communities being treated unjustly, that I respond to it, that we talk a lot about speaking the truth to power. That is something that's a very important feature of Jewish life. It also has its manifestations within Jewish communities. Jewish communities are very vocal and very verbal about speaking the truth to power. So even in the small world of a community and its rabbi and its board of administration, the members are very vocal about what they think. So we often get not unexpected, but expected conflicts, and we have to find ways to maintain the community in spite of the conflicts. So that is a sketch, I think, of the way I live my, at least I try to live my liberal Jewish life as part of the broader Jewish community, recognizing that we differ in the way that we manifest our Jewishness, accepting each other. I have friends in all of the movements, good friends, people that I can trust, people that I can talk to about important elements of my life. In addition to that, I represent, it sounds grand, but I'm 2 years ago, I was appointed as the envoy of the European Union of Progressive Judaism. That's a large organization which is part of the World Union of Progressive Judaism, but represents the European continent. And we represent 165, 170 different communities, some very large and some very small, but from every part, every corner of the European continent. And I was given the task of being the envoy of this group to the European Union. So I'm regularly invited to participate in European Commission organized events here in Brussels. And I'm there as a kind of listening ear of the European Union of Progressive Judaism, and I bring back to them important, to the leadership of the EUPJ, I bring back important information about what's happening and how our European institutions are dealing with issues related to fundamentally or primarily combating anti-Semitism in Europe, but with equal force and I think with equal importance, finding ways to promote Jewish life and to not only protect Jewish life, but to promote it, to show Jewish life, to present Jewish life in such a way that it's something that can be seen as an acceptable way of living within within European society. And the European Commission has invested a great deal in this. So, but sadly, much of the investment that was done on trying to improve the situation with respect to anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic acts, anti-Semitic attacks, anti-Semitic language, anti-Semitic posts on social media, etc., has had to face a major setback after the events of October 7th last year, 2023. Since then, there has been a meteoric rise in anti-Semitic attacks throughout Europe and throughout the world, but catalogued for us, at least from the Commission, within Europe and different countries that make up the European Union. And at many of these meetings, reports from the different countries, while they say they're doing their best to find ways to combat these problems, we find that they continue to increase, and that people feel at this moment, anti-Semites feel at this moment very enabled to do what they do. And for many Jews, it's a disturbing and frightening time. And whether you're a liberal Jew or a conservative Masorti Jew or an Orthodox Jew or an ultra-Orthodox Jew, it doesn't matter. We experience the same anti-Semitism. As I say, this has increased massively since October 7th, and it doesn't appear to be getting any better. In fact, in many countries, just today coming in again, driving in the car and listening to the news, horrendous anti-Semitic attacks in places where you would not expect it. But in the city of Amsterdam just today, massive attack. So it's still there. It's not going away. It's something we have to continue to talk about. And I'm interested and happy to be part of, as the EUPJ envoy, to contribute in my small way to combating anti-Semitism and promoting Jewish life. I do my promotion of Jewish life from my home, with my synagogue community, with our interfaith coalition that we set up in our community, visiting schools, talking to school children, trying to get rid of the stereotypes that people have, at least to address the stereotypes that people have about Jews and who Jews are and what Jews do. A lot of that I feel that I make a small but important contribution. I often ask, when I go to speak with a school group, how many Jews do you think there are in Belgium? And often the first answer is 2 or 3 million, that people think there are vast numbers of Jews all over the place. And they're very, very surprised to hear that there are only 38 to 40,000 Jews in Belgium, and that the population of Jews throughout the world is much, much smaller, and much that the astronomical millions that many are led to believe. I also ask them, what does a Jew look like? Even though they're looking at one, they will tell me that a Jew looks like someone who wears a black hat and has the curls, etc. So these are little minor stereotypes, but there are some major stereotypes that I have to deal with often in my school visits. But I see it as part of my contribution to helping Jewish communities to be established communities in the world and they live in the cities and towns they live in, and where they can be open and free, and where people understand who they are and who they are not. So the typical argument that the Jews have a lot of money, I am able to convince them that I don't have a lot of money, and just like them, sometimes I have to worry about whether I can pay the bills at the end of the month. That Jews have enormous power, global power over the media. Of course, I'm an example of someone who doesn't have that kind of power. There are Jews in the media, but there are many more non-Jews who are part of that world too. So I try to combat as many of these anti-Semitic stereotypes that exist in schools. It's part of what I do. I do that in Leuven, I do that in Brussels. We bring school groups into our synagogue and we engage with them in a discussion. It's not simply about bringing a group in to say, oh, here, this is where Jews have their prayer services. And these are some of the things that we use in a Torah scroll and other different little things that they get to see in the synagogue. No, we invite children, usually a little bit older children in the final grades of secondary school, to discuss stereotypes, to discuss how they understand Jewish life to be. That means also that we have to face a lot of uncomfortable conversation about the elephant in the room, and that is the war in Israel-Gaza. We have to have very often are called upon to have a perspective on that war in Gaza. And it's not always simple to present that. But nevertheless, I'm gratified and hopeful because so many of the school children that I've spoken to do not appear to have the same stereotypical perspectives as their parents seem to have in their grandparents. I think there's a positive evolution in our young people today, and I hope that will continue, that seeing Jews as not as monsters and not as controlling the world and controlling everything, but as just ordinary people, like myself, like you, trying to make our way through the world and trying to make an impact about the things that we find important. So that's my word or two about what Jewish life is for me, the foundations of what I believe Jewish life to be, and how I understand my own place within the Jewish world here in Belgium and elsewhere. Thank you.